What's up, Doc? Who? Franz Liszt. Never heard of him. Wrong number.
Warner's cartoons are the ones that made me laugh. Those are the ones that really connected with me.
If Disney was like classical music, Looney Tunes were like jazz.
I always loved the Warner Brothers stuff. That's the stuff I wanted to see.
The attitude portrayed in the Looney Tunes was of complete anarchism. They had a lot of spirit, and they were very anti-authoritarian.
Hello, pussycats.
They were so very funny.
Oh, no.
There was just some kind of atmosphere around them.
And as I got older,
Hello, Johnny.
I appreciated more and more about them. There were more subtle things that started to make me laugh. Just the raise of an eyebrow or a piece of great timing could make you laugh.
When they were making these cartoons, they put their heart and souls into these things, and it really shows.
Thank you.
I remain compelled and fascinated by them.
Because whatever your life burden is, when you watch one of these things, you just have to give it up for a few minutes, you know.
Meep, meep.
Our story opens around the turn of the 20th century, when animation was just starting to become something more than a novelty. Cartoonists like Winsor McCay experimented with animating comic strips, like this example from the 1914 classic Gertie the Dinosaur. Other animators like Otto Mesmer and Paul Terry helped prove that animation wasn't simply drawings that moved. Animation was really the process of invoking life. Kansas City, Missouri is where it all started, when a young artist named Walt Disney decided he was going to try his hand at animation. Disney was working at the Kansas City Film Ad Company, designing simple animated commercials for local theaters. One of Disney's co-workers was a young man named Isidore Frizz Freeling.
I was looking for a job, and there was an ad in the one ads for a boy, an office boy who could draw. That meant they wanted cheap artists, you know. And I went down there, and they hired me. And who was working there? Walt Disney.
The ambitious Disney moved to Los Angeles to pursue his visionary dreams, and he was soon followed one by his fellow animators, Hugh Harman, Rudolph Ising, and Ub Iwerks.
Eventually, Walt wrote to me and asked me to come to California. And I wrote to him and told him, I said, hell, I don't know anything about animation. And he said, well, we'll teach you. So I took the train and went to California and worked for Walt.
Frizz joined Walt on the West Coast, where he found himself working alongside many of his Kansas City cohorts. Together, they produced many successful, groundbreaking cartoons, such as Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. But it wasn't long before creative differences split the team apart. Disney and Iwerks continued on the road to developing the first popular sound cartoon, Steamboat Willie, starring Mickey Mouse. Harmonizing and Freeling also seized on the idea of sound and soon produced a cartoon that would ultimately lead to the birth of the Looney Tunes, Bosco the Talk Ink Kid.
We talked some studio into letting us experiment with the sound, because everybody was experimenting with sound then. And so we did a demonstration reel of little Bosco.
All right, Bosco, show me what you can do. Okay, boss, what's this here?
And we'd record some voices and piano playing.
There are a couple of ways of looking at the early Looney Tunes. One is as an offshoot of what Walt Disney was doing, because it was. Hugh Harman and Rudolph Ising had grown up, almost literally, with Walt Disney in Kansas City, had come with him to Hollywood, and they had all learned by trial and error together.
Mickey Mouse made Walt Disney an overnight success. Soon every animator on the block was trying to create the next superstar, but the end result always seemed to look like a second cousin to Disney's Mouse.
Mickey Mouse was like the Simpsons of its day. It was so popular that all the other studios were copying it. And it didn't matter what it was, it just had to be like Mickey Mouse. So Bosco was very close.
Well, so long, folks. See you all later.
The Bosco character and then his follow-up Buddy are kind of bland. There are variations on the same character everybody seemed to be doing then.
Well, everybody was trying to imitate Walt, let's face it. But after a while, everybody figured they can't beat Walt. They did their own thing. That's the way we did. We did our own thing.
Harmon and Ising shopped Bosco around Hollywood. Eventually, they found themselves at the doorstep of Leon Schlesinger, a producer who may not have known what made a good cartoon, but who did know what made money.
Producer Leon Schlesinger, who had a deal, an arrangement with Warner Brothers to do musical short subjects, set up the Harmon and Ising studio and produced the first Looney Tunes cartoons.
Leon Schlesinger made pictures which he sold to Warner Brothers. If you bought a Warner Brothers feature, you had to take the Pathé newsreel and their coming attraction and their short subjects, whatever they may be. So that meant that it really didn't matter whether they were any good or not. They were going to sell them anyway.
Warner Brothers had an agenda. They wanted to plug music.
They started making use of the Warner Brothers song library and plugging those songs that were being performed and introduced in Warner Brothers feature films, like Singing in the Bathtub. So music really became the foundation, and in some cases the raison d'etre for those cartoons.
It was the early version of music videos, really.
Bosco never did turn out to be the next Mickey Mouse. Harmon and Ising left Schlesinger for other opportunities, which left Friz Freleng as the senior director of the Looney Tunes. Leon Schlesinger didn't have the money to compete with Disney's lavish productions, but he did have the wisdom to hire top-notch directors, a talented composer named Carl Stalling, and two young animators, Robert McKimson and Charles M. Chuck Jones. These artists would help define the look and the humor of the Looney Tunes over the next 3 decades.
Leon was a great boss. I loved him.
Hello, Porky. Come on in.
Hello, Mr. Schlesinger. Hello, Leon.
I went to Warner Brothers, and he was a breath of fresh air. You just do it. It's your job. You draw it.
He really left these guys alone, and he only really just peripherally watched the cartoons.
Leon didn't care as long as he got 30 cartoons a year.
As long as you made his pictures on time and you didn't run over budget, everything was great.
He was a hard-nosed businessman, but you could deal with him. He ran the tight ship like all the movie producers, but he stayed out of the production end of it. All he cared about was making dollars, and he was making film, and he didn't know or care what went on in the film as long as it was acceptable to Warner Brothers.
He was a pretty thrifty guy, and Leon had this speedboat. He called it his yacht. And he would take us on the weekends, loaded up with beer and stuff. And Monday he'd come back and he'd give us the bill for the beer. Probably for the gas, too.
How's that? Pretty good, huh?
All right,
How's
all
about
right.
it, Leon? How's about it? What do you say? What do you say? What do you say? I'm no real
All right,
star
all
here.
right.
Within the structure of Warner Brothers cartoons, the Leon Schlesinger studio, they kept the guys making the Merry Melodies in the nice building, and they put the guys who were doing the Looney Tunes in this shack, which they nicknamed Termite Terrace, and it was this dilapidated wooden cottage.
They were really orphans, and nobody paid any attention to them. There was no sense of direction from management.
No one was over their shoulder. They had all the freedom in the world to make these funny films.
It was a gang of very creative, wonderfully creative people, all in one building there. Then they were all very young, in their 20s and early 30s, just having all kinds of fun.
Termite Terrace. They were all sort of rebellious guys, types, that didn't fit in too well.
It was really run down. Myself, I fit right in because I kind of like not being real neat.
It was just a beat-up building, It was just, they never painted anything else. It was an artist's attic is what it was.
All they did was put plasterboard on top of studs to make the rooms, and they didn't even cover the nails.
The walls, of course, were very thin, and you just lean on them and they'd fall apart.
No air conditioning. The floors were about ready to give way.
The desks were unpainted wood.
And the lighting was bad. It was one little light.
The windows had never been cleaned since the building was built.
It was just a disaster area.
But it had the proper atmosphere for cartoonists.
If it would have been a nice, beautiful building, probably nothing would have happened. It would have been too good. But this place, you couldn't do anything to it. It had already been wrecked.
I think being exiled from the main Warner Brothers studio and having to work in a rather ramshackle establishment gave all the guys at the cartoon studio a feeling of it was us against the world. They were the outsiders. And that's always a good fuel for comedy.
You see, you had to go to work every day, so you tried to make it as interesting as you could, and try to think of a new gag to pull on somebody maybe, or, try to prevent them from pulling a gag on you.
It happened in Packy every day, or you got the hot foot. They would stick a match in there and then light it. Before you know it, there was flames all around. And you'd jump up, but you never knew when it was going to happen.
When you see the cartoons on the screen, and it's bright and cheery and fun and clean and crisp, and I couldn't imagine these cartoons coming out of Termite Terrace.
And now we will hear Little Kitty.
The Looney Tunes and their companion series, Merry Melodies, were cute attempts to mimic the competition, but Schlesinger wanted to beat the competition. Luckily for the Looney Tunes, change was right around the corner.
What really changed Looney Tunes was the arrival of Tex Avery. Leon Schlesinger was looking for a new director. Avery had a little experience at that. He was really mostly an animator, but he had just enough experience to talk his way into that job. And he immediately brought new and really revolutionary ideas to the studio.
Tex Avery quickly seized on the idea of turning the Looney Tunes into star comedians.
He liked Porky. He thought Porky was just a strange character and he could have fun with that character. So he made Porky the star of his first Looney Tunes cartoons.
There's something fishy about that.
Once Avery had made a star out of Porky, he next turned his attention to a character that was as loony and crazy as his name. Daffy Duck.
I'm not crazy. I just don't give a darn.
Tex Avery was way ahead of himself as far as an artist was and as a director. When you see the bulk of his work, it's really a genius at work doing things that a lot of people didn't understand.
I love Singer, about the moon and the June and Springer. I love Singer.
He had a different take on things, which was that nothing in the universe was sacred.
Hey in there! How about a handout?
The pace of the cartoons got faster. The kind of gags were crazier. They'd break the fourth wall and talk to the audience. These are things that Tex Avery introduced. His characters knew they were cartoon characters, and they could do cartoony things.
Boy meets girl, boy starts to blush.
He would go as far as he could go, and then he'd go farther, and then he'd go farther still.
I'm forever blowing power.
He was such an inspiration to the rest of the people in the studio who were looking at what the boundaries might be or might not be.
I really think that he was a fundamental influence in kicking Warner Brothers in that direction. I think all the others went happily in that direction and brought their own incredibly brilliant and ingenious things to it. But I think Tex Avery really was the wild card who fell into the deck, and suddenly there was disorder in the court.
In all of his films, you notice they started out quite quietly, and then suddenly it was like walking through a storeroom full of fireworks. You knew they were there, you knew they were going to go off, but you didn't know when.
Of all of Avery's cartoons, one stood out as the landmark that changed the face of the Looney Tunes forever. On the surface, A Wild Hare was a typical cartoon that starred a dopey hunter named Elmer Fudd, who's out to catch himself a wabbit. But Avery's cartoon was more than just another Looney Tune. It marked the first of many encounters between Elmer and that wisecracking, carrot-chopping sensation, Bugs Bunny.
Pardon me, but you know, you look just like a wabbit.
Come here. Listen, Doc. Now, don't spread this around. But, confidentially, I am a wabbit!
The Wild Hare was just another cartoon with great, outrageous characters. It was just, for Tex Avery, it was just another funny cartoon.
Say, you wouldn't be that screwy wabbit, would you?
Could be.
Immediately, the studio realized there was something. It had something. We used to always run them for everybody when we got finished, and they'd kind of vote on it. And they knew there was something. They couldn't quite know what it was. Well, it was the personality and Mel's voice.
What's up, Doc?
Yeah, what's up, Doc? That was probably one of the great signal moments in Warner Brothers history, is when that line first came out of his mouth.
Audiences loved that cartoon. They called the studio when they were at the box office. They'd say, when are we going to see more of that rabbit? Like the box office had something to do with it.
It's the same year that he made a cartoon at Warner's called The Crackpot Quail, which features a character who acts exactly like Bugs Bunny.
You know, Doc, you're right!
The quail never went anywhere, but Bugs Bunny did.
So this was the beginning of a wonderful creative explosion, not just for Warner Brothers, but for cartoons in general, because Disney had always been the one to watch. When Tex Avery was let loose at Warner's in the mid-30s, Frank Tashlin followed him, and these two very ingenious and irreverent guys with their wild, zany sense of humor were making the fastest, sharpest, funniest cartoons of anybody. Then everybody had to look to them.
Tashlin had a great style, which was a combination of trying to stage things kind of realistically, but yet would push the envelope with humor.
Frank Tashlin experimented with speed, accelerated and exaggerated speed, which had not been done really.
Plus he had his own artistic style, the way he drew. In the 30s, you'll see lots of round shapes in Tashlin cartoons. In the 40s, you'll see lots of angular shapes. He went to this stylized thing with lots of straight lines.
Frank, well, he was a great director. Frank was a great artist. Ooh, Frank was one of my favorite human beings. He's a guy that made a great change from animation and into live action.
Here is Frank Tashlin, director of The Lieutenant Wore Skirts and The Girl Can't Help.
You can see by looking at his cartoons that he was thinking about making these films from like a live action perspective, and looking at Porky Pig's Feet, the cartoon with Daffy and Porky are trying to get out of a hotel because they can't pay the bill. There's all these spectacular camera point of views. If he was just doing them as cartoons, he would have done what everybody does, which is just set the scene straight on. He's got the camera down below looking up above looking down, following trucking shots, all sorts of things that, you know, he'd later use in live action. Of course, when he made Bob Hope and Jerry Lewis comedies later, he used a lot of cartoon gags in those films. And that's his trademark in live action, was the fact that he did these cartoony-like gags.
Tex Avery's influence spread quickly among the gag men and animators, and one animator turned director in particular, a very young and hip Bob Clampett, who, next to Tex, would literally stretch the boundaries of animation beyond the point of no return.
He actually started at Warner Brothers when he was only 17 years old. I remember Frizz telling me about my grandmother driving my father to school, to Warner Brothers. It was like a school for him at that age. When he was matched with Tex Avery and assigned to Tex's unit as an animator, he found an enormous inspiration in Tex. Tex was so irreverent and so willing to be wild and push things to the edge, and that was just the perfect influence for Dad. When he finally was allowed to be a director, the doors were swung open.
Bob was a pretty zany guy.
Is this trip really necessary, son?
You know, you get, wonderful gag man, and fun to be around, fun to work with.
Being at Warner Brothers just created an opportunity for him, because there was a freedom there that there weren't at other places, that he could try different things. He figured that you've got this world where you can do anything that comes to your imagination with animation. There's nothing holding you back, so why not take advantage of that? If you look at the span of his cartoons, he really lived that feeling of pushing everything to the edge and never holding back.
You ever freeze frame certain moments of a Bob Clampett Warner Brothers cartoon? It's fantastic. Say a character shifts a position or runs out of frame or runs into the shot. You'll see that in those moments of motion, Bob Clampett has turned the character into this like insane freeform swirl. And what it did is it added that extra turbo boost of energy into that movement of the character. If you really want to see it, freeze frame, and you'll see something that is more outrageous than anything Picasso ever drew.
As the world faced new crises, people turned to humor to relieve their immediate problems, even for a short stretch of 7 minutes. In an effort to do their part, the Warner team joined forces with the U.S. Army to produce a series of gag-filled training films starring the always inept Private Snafu.
Any pawns today?
Bugs Bunny was at the forefront promoting patriotism, while Daffy was quick to dodge the little man from the draft board.
I guess he's gone now. Well, now, I wouldn't say that.
But Termite Terrace was about to face many changes. Tex Avery clashed with Leon Schlesinger over creative differences and soon found himself suspended from directing. Avery quickly found work across town, though, at MGM, but his departure was soon followed by both Tashlin and Clampett, who also had other ambitions.
Yeah, I quit.
But perhaps the biggest shock of all was the sale of Leon Schlesinger's studio to Warner Brothers.
And for being such a good sport, I'm going to give you the $26 million and 3 cents.
He was an entrepreneur. He was somebody who was looking for a way to make a buck.
Eddie Seltzer, who was a studio manager after Warner Brothers Cartoons bought the cartoon company from Schlesinger, and he had no knowledge of cartoons, and he had absolutely no sense of humor whatsoever.
He hated cartoons. He stuck his head in there one time, we were laughing, and he says, "What's funny about making cartoons?"
Good.
Leon, of course, somebody said they gave him $1 million. Boom, like that, you know.
I'm comfortably well off. Woohoo!
He thought he'd put over something big on Warner Brothers. We got $1 million. He thought he was selling property and a bunch of furniture. He didn't realize they were buying the characters.
Now there goes a salesman.
Didn't realize what he had there.
Okay, Porky. Don't forget me when you're a star.
By 1945, World War II was over and the Looney Tunes were settling down at their new home, where Warner Brothers welcomed them with open arms.
I'm telling you, J.L., you're typecasting me to death. Comedy, all this comedy, ha-ha.
And behind the tour de force of the nearly 100 animated characters was the extraordinary voice of Mel Blanc. Blanc had been working in radio before he was hired to record the voice of a drunken bull in 1937's Picador Porky. His abilities quickly attracted every director at the studio.
Mel obviously established the voices for 99.9% of the characters.
Mel would come in and we'd tell him what kind of a character this was, personality-wise. We'd try to describe it. And Mel would try out different voices, and when we hit on something that we thought, well, that's it, then he stuck with that.
What was great about Mel was his acting. He absolutely understood the personalities of these characters and understood the nuances of delivering a line.
He'd get in there, get the script, look it over quickly. He'd have a way of marking the script, different for each character. Once he marked the script, that was it. Got in front of the microphone and could do it. And if he had to do 2 or 3 takes on one line, that would be a lot.
Part of that is his training as a radio actor. I mean, he was a voice actor for years before he got this cartoon gig. And he created the sounds of these characters.
The energy level alone is astounding. On top of that, the variations in his voice were incredible.
To find somebody like Mel Blanc from radio who had this ability to perform all these characters and be fresh and funny and bring something new to every character and a new personality to every character is really rare. I mean, where else does that exist? Maybe a Groucho Marx or a Chaplin or somebody like that can create all those different characters with such comic timing. I think Mel Blanc is really in the same league as those guys.
Of course, there were other great voice artists as well. There was June Foray.
I don't remember seeing her at any of the union meetings.
Stan Freberg.
Better give me a lot of lumps. A whole lot of lumps.
Arthur Q. Bryan, who did Elmer Fudd. B. Benaderet.
Well, look at this. A darling little monkey.
I mean, there were just terrific, terrific voice artists, but I think Mel was kind of the heart and soul of the vocalization in those pictures.
He was the only person to get credit through all these years. There was one exception, which was a cartoon called The Three Little Bops, where Stan Freberg did all the voices in that one cartoon.
When I did The Three Little Bops for Frizz, he said, "Oh, this is ridiculous. This is going to say Stan Freberg." And that was really the first screen credit I got when Frizz gave me that for The Three Little Bops.
I don't think you would have had Looney Tunes without Mel Blanc and Carl Stalling, really.
Carl Stalling's music just really set the tone.
Carl Stalling used to be an organist at Kansas City movie theaters back in the silent movie days, so he would accompany silent pictures. When he got into the animation business, first with Disney and then subsequently with Warner's, he was already adept at matching music to picture.
Stalling's work is really remarkable if you stop and just listen to what he's doing. His musical commentary on events, moment by moment. I think it's fair and appropriate to say his music is another character.
And I realized that half the gag was the music. It was the way that he would just play these things, you know.
And he would write it, and then Milt Franklin would do the arranging, and then when Carl retired, Milt Franklin took over.
Milt Franklin was terrific at the orchestrations, knowing exactly which instruments to use or not use. Sometimes the entire track would quiet down just for a couple of xylophone hits on an eye blink.
Scotland?
And through all those years, a man named Treg Brown was the sound editor. Sound effects and the use of sound effects and the combining of the sound effects with the music was all under his control. He was another member of the creative team. Chuck Jones often talked about how he would put incongruous sound effects underneath an action and make it even funnier.
Treg was a musician to start with and had a lot of energy, and he did more than you asked for. He tried different things. He just had fun doing what he was doing. He was an innovator, really.
We're still using, in the movie, Treg Brown sound effects. You know, the sound library that we use is filled with Warner Brothers sound effects.
It's the whole experience. You know, the whole experience is you see something, you hear it, you experience it. It's not a complete experience if you turn the sound down and you realize what an important contribution the guys in the sound department, the musicians and the vocal actors made to these cartoons.
Attention, there's been a slight change in the teetotaler lineup. Catching, Bugs Bunny. Left field, Bugs Bunny.
By the mid-40s, the Looney Tunes had their established leading stars. Friz Freleng, the team's senior director, continued to bring fresh attitudes to the supporting players, most notably that hot-tempered hombre, Yosemite Sam.
Start walking, you doggone long-eared galoot.
In 1947, Friz paired two of those characters together, a small canary named Tweety Bird and a slobbering cat named Sylvester. The cartoon, Tweety Pie, won Freleng and Warner Brothers Cartoons their very first Academy Award, and a new star team was born.
Let's talk a little bit about Frizz. Frizz was a sweetheart, and he was the easiest of the bunch and the most talented in my book.
My dad never had an art lesson in his life. Not only not formal training, he had no training. He was self-taught.
He just intuitively knew what made things funny.
But I think his inspiration was it was fun to do. He liked the people he worked with.
And he was so easy. You know, Frizz never had an ego.
I don't think any of us ever make a cartoon that we're completely 100% happy with. I like what I did. If you don't like what you're doing, you can't make a good cartoon. I like every character that I worked on.
And he always said that these memorable characters came to life because of his associates, his people who worked by him. He couldn't have done it without them.
Frizz's great genius was the fact that he knew what the audience would like and what was funny. Like he had a scene once where Sylvester walks through the scene, he dropped the hammer. And they said, well, why did he do that? And he said, because it makes him human. Nothing funny about it, but it's human, you know.
Really great humor is just as much of an art as great drama or anything else. And I don't know, it's the timing. Frizz has had a certain timing.
He would work on these sheets. They were long pink sheets that he would work on, and I'd say, what is that? And he'd try to explain it to me. But it was the timing, and it was very complicated. You know, it was almost like a science.
I would say probably of all those people, he was a master of timing. Because of his musical knowledge, you know, he was one of the few animators or directors able to do that.
But he always worked on bar sheets, and he'd time a whole picture out with this.
I made the action work to rhythm. Things were timed musically, some of them were just instinct.
Frizz would do a character would be like this, and he's going up a stair, and he goes, tick, 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 tick.
I put a mark there for a bang, so we go da 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 bang.
At the time, you don't expect it. There's no warning to that.
You got to use your instincts to guide you in a lot of stuff, whether it's right or wrong. When a guy goes off scene, when he comes on, how fast he goes out or how fast he comes in. I mean, you can't set any rules because half of them don't work.
I don't think he realized he was as talented as he was. I really think he felt he was just making a living.
Frizz had the respect of everybody that I have ever known, and it was an honor to have him as my partner for over 30 years. And I just can't say enough about the guy and, you know, his work ethic. And nobody ever worked harder at anything than Frizz Freeling. And he's just a monument. An icon in the animation business. Arguably the greatest that ever came down the pike.
When Frank Tashlin left Termite Terrace in 1946, his directing shoes were quickly filled by Robert McKimpson. McKimpson was an animator whose skills were rarely matched, and alongside Tex Avery and Bob Clampett, he helped define the image of Bugs Bunny in the early 1940s. Starting with Harmon and Ising and ending with the closure of the studio, McKimpson was the one person to have worked with the Looney Tunes from start to finish.
Bob McKimpson looked like some man out of the 20s. He would always dress in a dapper suit.
Bob Kempson was a real gentleman and a great talent.
He was a brilliant artist.
He was very fast, and he was the consummate artist.
He just had an amazing hand and was a beautiful animator.
He drew the perfect shapes of Bugs and Porky and Daffy and Tweety.
He would draw one continual line and not trace back on his drawings. He was in an accident, it was sometime in the 30s, where he had a slight concussion. When he woke up, he could then visualize things much better, and he could animate at a very rapid rate.
After getting hit on the head, his production went up threefold. Actually, threefold.
I think Bob McKimpson was referred to as the best character man. He dreamed up a lot of wonderful characters for Warner's, and they all looked upon him as being the best, even though Chuck and Frizz also invented characters, but Bob sort of had that facility that was really considered quite successful.
I thought he was terrific, and they overlooked things like Taz and the Foghorn Leghorn. Bob really made some quite significant contributions to the success of Warner Brothers cartoons.
He loved parodies. He did the Honey Mousers, which of course were based upon the Jackie Gleason television show.
It was a takeoff on the Honeymooners, and
I did Alice. I did an impersonation of Alice as a mouse. And then I said, well, Bob, when is it coming out? He said, it'll be out soon, but I had to get Gleason's permission. He wanted to see it first, because if it made the Honeymooners look silly, he wouldn't allow it to be shown in theaters. So fortunately, Jackie Gleason liked it.
And then that led him into the Jack Benny cartoon. Apparently Jack Benny had seen the Honeymousers and called Jack Warner and asked him why he couldn't have a cartoon made about his group. So that's what led my father into doing the mouse that Jack built. And Jack Benny and his crew donated their voices, so to speak, for that cartoon.
McKimpson's slapstick sensibilities were showcased in the wildly popular Foghorn Leghorn series. And like the other directors, he embraced the idea of character development with new faces like Sylvester Jr., Hippity Hopper, and that notorious bad boy, the Tasmanian Devil.
So they were looking for a new character that wasn't a dog, a cat, a mouse, or a rabbit. So my father said, what about a Tasmanian Devil? Well, none of his animators, which included my Uncle Chuck, knew what a Tasmanian Devil was. So they looked up in various encyclopedias, found out what a Tasmanian Devil looked like. So my father said to his animators, look, you all draw what you think a cartoon version of Tasmanian Devil would look like, and I'll draw the same thing. They all came up with a drawing which looked pretty much like my father's. So my father took their drawings and incorporated it into his final model sheet for the Tasmanian Devil. It is my understanding Tasmanian Devil is the second most popular character in the Looney Tunes family after Bugs Bunny. He's just so different from the rest of the characters. He always wanted to go to work. He loved every minute of animating and directing the Looney Tunes gang of characters.
Chuck Jones began his long directing career back in 1938, quickly displaying a flair for artistic innovation. In the early 40s, he proved himself stylistically progressive, and as a storyteller, he was quick to discover new ways to approach established characters.
A clue! Really, Holmes, you never cease to amaze me.
By the 1950s, Jones perfected his great sense of timing with a wildly popular series featuring a pathetic coyote on an endless quest to catch an ultra-fast roadrunner.
A lot of people who weren't terribly conversant with Warner Brothers cartoons seem to remember the Chuck Jones stuff the best.
I have heard probably thousands of people tell me that they grew up with Chuck Jones.
Chuck Jones was a real artist, and I think he had an artist's mind and an artist's sensibility.
His whole idea was to go to Paris and perish before he was 25 as a struggling young artist. It never occurred to him that he was going to go into cartoons.
And he encouraged us to take extracurricular art courses. He very much wanted to have us expand our artistic knowledge.
Chuck, I think, was the intellectual of the animation industry. He could quote Mark Twain at the drop of a pegboard.
Whether it was music, art, history, Chuck was a really, really brilliant man in every area.
His earliest work as a director is often very sweet, very cute, and he had a keen interest in tiny characters and their point of view. Sometimes this was a leading character, as in Sniffles, the mouse.
I was always eager to experience different things, and it was always dangerous, because usually if you tried something out, like the Mynah Bird, for instance, which was one of those things where nobody laughed, at the studio. At the studio, it was terrifying. You'd go in there and you could hear the crickets like we used in cartoons.
Some of his early films were very Disney-like. They were like fairy tales. They had a lot of character, a lot of charm, but they weren't Looney Tunes. They weren't fast-paced, funny cartoons as everyone else was making. Leon Schlesinger went to him and said, "You've got to make these cartoons funny. You got to change your ways," and he did. He ultimately changed his ways big time, and ultimately did some of the greatest Looney Tunes ever.
After a certain point, you could actually watch a Bugs Bunny cartoon and identify it as a Chuck Jones Bunny cartoon, as opposed to a Friz Freleng Bunny cartoon or a Bob Clampett Bunny cartoon. he became interested in how to get laughs out of simple things. He's the one, of course, who famously got laughs out of eyebrow wriggles. The tiniest gestures. No one else even tried to do that, but he did and succeeded.
He could do story and he could write scripts and do gags. He could do it all, only he preferred to let others who specialized,
My father was fond of saying that his greatest talent was surrounding himself with great talent. He truly believed that. He felt that the people that worked with and for him were the reason that the cartoons came out so wonderfully.
Never send a monster to do the work of an evil scientist.
Some people say, don't you have a favorite character? Well, of course you don't have a favorite character. I mean, I've dealt in my lifetime, I guess, with 200 different characters, which I tried to understand. The answer is you can't have a favorite character. You owe every character the same kind of attention that you do a star like Bugs Bunny.
Quack, quack.
Chuck knew music. My dad knew music. And of course, the musical numbers that Chuck did with my dad, I think are wonderful. Like What's Opera, Doc?
I never get tired of watching it.
I'm going to kill the wabbit.
It's just such a rich cartoon. So much was put into it. The idea that you could make a cartoon like that as just one product coming down the yearly assembly line is amazing.
Well, what did you expect in an opera?
One Froggy Evening is one of those miracle cartoons. It came out of nowhere. It was just a simple idea. It was not part of a continuing series, and yet it's perfect. I think of it as kind of the cartoon equivalent of a really good short story.
Cartoons like One Froggy Evening and Birds Anonymous were team efforts fueled by the men and women who could create outrageous stories and make art come to life. Like all great art, the animators made the cartoons for themselves, and this was really the key to their success.
There were units at Warner Brothers, and usually there were 3 units working at the same time to churn out as many as 50 cartoons a year. So usually each director was paired with a writer or possible team of writers, and certain animators who would tend to work with them in their unit. So in time, these units solidified and really became very well-oiled machines.
The writer was the key to the whole thing, putting together a great storyline.
As great as all the Warner Brothers writers were, Maltese was the best.
Chuck Jones and Mike Maltese worked extremely well together, and it was like 2 pieces of a functioning unit.
Warren Foster, who became Freeling's main writer, was with Clampett. What happened was when Clampett left, Freeling picked the people from Clampett's unit that he thought were particularly good.
Chuck had his own writer, Mike Maltese, Frizz had his, but they would have a jam session before either one of them started directing. Everybody, all the writers, directors got in on it. They'd throw gags at it and discuss it. And that way you had a lot of material to edit, throw it out or leave it in, And half the time you'd have enough for another picture.
A lot of the characters and a lot of the development of those characters comes from experiences that the writers would have. Ted Pierce was extremely funny, one of the funniest guys in the world, just as a person, because he looked like Ichabod Crane, but he was very elegant.
Ted Pierce, the writer, he came in one day, and we see him coming up the hall, and he's dressed up in the suit, the tie, and everything. Then he gets in there and takes his coat off, and what he's done is he cut the sleeves off in here, and they were hanging with a string, just to get a laugh.
Mike Maltese and Ted Pierce and Warren Foster, the 3 of the best story men, the best gag men in the business. I was fortunate. I had at least four of the best animators that ever lived. Benny Washam and Ken Harris, Phil Monroe, and Abe Levitot. Ken was perfect. He was an animator in the truest sense. A single drawing meant nothing to Ken.
Maurice Noble was, of course, the great art director that worked with my father for many, many years.
And Maurice's work is just superlative. I don't think it's been matched hardly at all. They made some wonderful pictures together, but a lot of it was because of Maurice Noble's input.
Holly Pratt was Frizz Freeling's fantastic layout man. His style was so good.
Well, he added a lot to my work. I mean, he plussed it.
You don't create classic cartoons or anything else with just warm bodies. Each unit was handpicked by the director.
After 20 years of being stuck in the outhouse, the Looney Tunes were finally allowed to join the rest of the family in a new animation studio built especially for them right on the Warner Brothers lot. Termite Terrace may have been the birthplace of Bugs Bunny, but that didn't stop the animators from celebrating their big move from Hollywood to Burbank.
The last day at Termite Terrace was quite something.
Warner Brothers was building up their big studio in Burbank, and we knew that we were going to move. So it started about 2 days before we quit. We decided to start ripping the place apart.
We had like a champagne party going on, and it gave a great excuse. We literally trashed the place.
The next week, after a little bit of recovering, we went to work at the other studio.
The well-oiled system of directors, storymen, and animators continued to turn out cartoons of merit, ultimately winning the team 6 Oscars and several more nominations. But despite their success, the studios continued to look for more ways to keep budgets down.
In the 1950s came television. And suddenly, everything changed in Hollywood. From a peak of attendance in the 1940s, movie attendance fell sharply. Where did that leave the cartoon? Well, the theater owners still wanted to show cartoons. That was part of the movie-going habit for everybody then. But they didn't want to pay any more for them than they had 5 years or 10 years earlier. So the studios had to keep a sharper eye on the budgets. And then television started buying up the old cartoons.
$26 million and 3 cents? If so.
And running them every day, as well as on weekends for kids. And eventually, somebody got the bright idea of producing cartoons exclusively for television. That began to place an impossible level of competition and burden on the theatrical cartoon departments. And one by one, they shut down. And they'd been really eclipsed by television.
The trend toward television and studio cutbacks soon eclipsed the Looney Tunes spotlight. The cartoons seemed to have run out of steam, leaving Warner Brothers to come to a fateful decision in 1963.
They threaten every day to close the studio. Here you're raising a family with kids, and they threatened. One day it came true. They threatened and they closed the studio on us. Everybody was out of a job.
It was very, very sad. Very sad. We just, we didn't know where to go, what to do anymore,
I got that call to come to New York, and they said, well, we've decided we're going to close it down. It was a real blow, because I didn't see this coming.
It was like a family splitting up, It really was.
They really didn't want to be in this business anymore. Yeah, they decided to close it down.
You got too much talent. I need you in my act.
Ironically, this was not the end for the Looney Tunes. Bugs Bunny and Friends would remain on television for the next 4 decades, influencing the next generation of animators, comedians, and just about anyone who watched Saturday morning television. The Looney Tunes would continue to sink into the American consciousness and cause great laughter by association.
There was this extraordinary group of talent that came together at one time. But I think also that never before and never again will there be the level of creative freedom that they had to do what they did.
I wouldn't have traded that time for anything. Because of the friendship, the humor, the fun things we did do.
Our units were our family. We'd rush to work to work there. We didn't look at the clock and say, well, is it time to go home? So I look back at that as days that you'd like to relive, get back to.
It was quite an experience, and reflecting back to the old Termite Terrace days, I'm glad I had that experience.
Every day, I couldn't wait to get to work. I'd wake up and I just couldn't wait to get to work because I knew it was going to be another fun day. How many people enjoy their work that much?
So it was kind of playtime all day long. We'd take a work break once in a while. But we had fun. That was, I think, the secret of the whole thing. Just the fact that we were like a big family.
I must admit, I still like my old cartoons, the ones that I thought were funny. I can still laugh at them or laugh with them, whichever it is.
To do a voice for Warner Brothers cartoons, it was just the love of my life. I enjoyed doing that more than anything that I've ever done. We owe a great debt of gratitude to Warner Brothers cartoons and all the great directors for bringing us all those laughs and light moments in our life. Life sometimes is not so full of laughs. And that's one quality that Warner Brothers Cartoons has brought to people. It brought a smile to their lips always.
As Mel would say at the end, the D-E, the D-E, the D-E, that's all, folks.
What did they do on a rainy night in Rio? A rinky-pinky-pink, what did they do when there is no starry sky? Oh, starry sky, where do they go when they can't go for a walk? Do they stay home and talk, or do they sit and We were sailing along on a moonlight bay. We could hear those voices singing. They seemed to say